During a live policy forum at the National Clean Energy Summit, former President Barack Obama caught reporters off guard by openly accusing Texas Governor Greg Abbott of quietly undermining federal climate initiatives. Hours later, in a small Houston studio, Abbott would deliver a calm but cutting response, one that didn't just defend him, but flipped the narrative entirely, leaving the political landscape buzzing. It had begun as another carefully moderated forum in D.C., the usual policy remarks, some forward-looking statements. But midway through his speech, Obama leaned toward the podium, lowered his voice just enough to suggest seriousness, and delivered a line that stopped the room cold. "We've made real progress in this country, but there are still folks, yes, even sitting governors, working behind the curtain to stall our momentum. I'm talking about Greg Abbott." The crowd didn't gasp, but you could feel the temperature shift. Pens froze mid-sentence. Cameras tightened focus. Obama didn't stop there. He accused Abbott of using his office to block environmental regulations, delay infrastructure upgrades, and pressure federal agencies from implementing key climate policies. He had his chance to lead. He chose culture wars. Now he's choosing sabotage. The delivery wasn't casual. It was precise, designed to provoke. Reporters immediately jumped in. "President Obama, are you saying Governor Abbott is actively interfering with federal policy?" Obama didn't blink. "I'm not speculating. I'm stating a fact. People in the agencies are talking about it. It's happening." In the back of the room, a journalist mouthed, "Whoa." This wasn't the usual partisan jab. It was personal. Within minutes, the clip exploded on social media. The words Greg Abbott and sabotage began trending side by side. Newsrooms from Los Angeles to Atlanta ripped up their editorial rundowns. Climate policy coverage was replaced with a political flashpoint. Cable networks ran the footage on loop. Some slowed it down, zooming in on Obama's expression. On MSNBC, an anchor leaned forward. "We've never seen him call out Abbott directly like this. Not with this tone, not with this level of accusation." On Fox, commentators spun it as Obama trying to insert himself back into the arena. On CNN, the delivery was dissected word by word. By the time the event ended, the air in Washington was electric. Reporters clustered outside, tossing theories around. Was this a distraction from recent federal missteps? A calculated strike to box Abbott into the national spotlight? A move to reignite Democratic momentum ahead of election season? But one thing was clear. Greg Abbott had been directly challenged on a national stage, and Obama didn't do things like this lightly. Since leaving office, Obama had mostly chosen measured silence over confrontation. He rarely responded to direct attacks, preferring to let facts and time do the work. This time was different. The accusation wasn't about political disagreement. It was about integrity. And the way he said it made it sound like something concrete was brewing. At a diner in Amarillo, Texas, a retired teacher watched the clip on a wall-mounted TV. If he's got proof, he should show it. A younger man shook his head. Abbott's not going to let that slide, not this time. Across the country, speculation took hold. Would Abbott respond? Would he stay silent? Would one of his allies step up? Political strategists on both sides began calculating next moves. A sharp reply from Abbott could dominate the cycle, but a misstep could drag him into a war of words with one of the most disciplined political figures in modern history. Back in Austin, a reporter texted one of Abbott's senior aides, "You see this?" The reply came back fast. He saw it. He's thinking. And that meant everything. Greg Abbott thinking meant Greg Abbott planning. And when he responded, if he did, it wouldn't be impulsive. It would be surgical. Because the fight wasn't over ideology anymore. It was over credibility. Obama's team began circulating talking points to media surrogates. "President Obama is simply asking the tough questions the press avoids," one memo read. The goal was clear. Keep the story alive long enough for it to settle into public perception. Meanwhile, over in Austin, one of Greg Abbott's closest former communications advisors, Daniel Reyes, sat on his couch replaying the footage for the fifth time. His phone buzzed. A group chat lit up with a few trusted insiders. Maggie. "So, he finally took the shot." Eli. "Yeah, and still no evidence. Classic." Daniel. "Doesn't matter, it's sticky. He's planting seeds." Maggie. "Think Abbott will answer?" Daniel. "If he does, it'll be surgical. You know his style." They all knew Abbott didn't do messy. When he responded to criticism, it was never with volume, it was with clarity. One clean line that made the opponent look sloppy just for bringing it up. Across town in a Houston newsroom, political reporter Trina Salazar was preparing for a routine segment when her producer came in with a twist. "Abbott's in town for that infrastructure forum, right?" Trina nodded. "Well, you've got the mic, you've got the camera. If anyone gets the first reaction, it's you. Don't waste it." Trina wasn't convinced she'd get anything beyond a polite shrug. Abbott had become a master of sidestepping bait, but still, the idea of getting the clip was too tempting to resist. By mid-afternoon, the conversation had reached talk radio. In Los Angeles, a conservative host praised Obama for finally calling out the chaos at the state level. In Philadelphia, a liberal host laughed and said, "Come on, Abbott running a secret sabotage op, please." Back in Washington, some of Obama's aides were doing damage control math. One strategist muttered, "If Abbott fires back, this could blow up for a full week. And you know how he does it. He'll sound calm while carving you up." But that didn't seem to concern Obama. Later that day, during a Q&A at a clean energy panel, he doubled down. "We're hearing things from smart people, people inside. Believe me, we're going to get to the bottom of it." The tone was confident, deliberately vague. Critics called it smoke and mirrors. Supporters called it straight talk. But the real question across Texas and beyond was simple. Would Abbott respond? Cable news tickers now tracked the hours since Obama's accusation. Headlines rolled out fast. Will Abbott answer? Did Obama go too far? Governor under pressure. Every time another story tried to break through, a new commentator pulled it back to the same point. Maybe Abbott's silence was his response. But in a modest meeting room on the second floor of the Texas governor's mansion, a very different conversation was underway. Maria Nunes, Abbott's longtime chief of staff, closed the door behind her. "He's not letting this one slide," she said. "He's got something to say. And we're going to choose exactly how and when." That sentence was like a match tossed in dry brush. The possibility that Abbott might respond, directly on camera, sent the entire media machine scrambling again. They all knew. If he answered, it would be sharp, rehearsed without sounding rehearsed, and aimed directly at the nerve Obama had tried to press. Upstairs in the strategy room, blinds drawn against a dusky Austin sky, 4 aides sat with laptops open, waiting. This team had spent years keeping Abbott focused, precise, and out of unnecessary political dogfights. Then the door opened. Abbott walked in wearing a gray quarter-zip pullover, slacks, and that familiar calm, the kind that never betrayed what he was really thinking. "All right," he said, pulling out a chair. "I saw the clip, twice." He placed his phone screen down on the table. That meant, "I'm here, talk to me." Daniel spoke first. "It's not the first time he's poked you, but this one's different. He's saying you're actively working against the administration. It's a serious claim, baseless, but sticky." Abbott leaned back slightly. "What's the chatter outside these walls?" Maria flipped through her notes. "Blanket coverage. Some think you'll ignore it. Some want you to hit back. Socials split. Your base is fired up, but they're waiting on your lead." Abbott scanned their faces. Then he said, "So, do we let this fade, or?" He let the sentence dangle. Maggie picked it up. "If you're going to answer, it can't be a swipe. It has to dismantle the whole thing in a way that makes him look unserious for even bringing it up." Abbott tapped his fingers against the table in a steady beat. "You know I don't do back alley brawls." Daniel smiled. "No, but you do care when someone questions your record." Abbott nodded. "Fair." Then they started tossing out ideas, not what to say, but how to say it. But the real question wasn't what to say, it was how to say it. The wrong setting would make it look like Abbott was chasing headlines. The right one would suggest the story had come to him. A press release wouldn't be enough. Obama had delivered his accusations on live television. The response had to live in that same space, on camera, on record, on point. "What about the Houston Infrastructure Forum?" Maria suggested. "You're already on the schedule for this afternoon. If a reporter asks," Abbott shook his head. "That makes it look like I'm waiting in the wings. I'd rather say it on my terms." "Then we find a slot today," Daniel said. "Not tomorrow, not next week. You control the clock, or they will." They shifted to logistics. Which networks were credible, but wouldn't make the interview feel scripted? Who could handle the exchange without turning it into theater? Daniel suggested Cameron Wells at Texas Public News. Sharp, fair, never one for grandstanding. Maria checked her phone. He's in Dallas, but doing remote tapings this week. If we reach out in the next hour, we can book it. Abbot gave a single nod. Do it. For the next 30 minutes, they laid the foundation for what would become the response everyone would be talking about. Abbot didn't want a speech. He wanted a structure, a few indisputable facts, a reaffirmation of his principles, and one line, just one, that would carry enough weight to echo through headlines without sounding like a punch. Maria was already on the phone. Daniel drafted a short press statement. Governor Abbot will address the day's developments in a previously scheduled interview this evening. No direct mention of Obama, just enough to make journalists block out time on their rundown sheets. As Abbot stood to leave, he paused in the doorway. I'm not doing this for some 12-hour spin cycle. I'm doing it because people deserve truth. And when someone tries to cloud that, you don't just nod and move on. The room fell quiet. Then Daniel replied, Understood. We'll make sure they hear you. Abbot gave a short nod and walked out. In the hallway, a young intern leaned toward Maria, voice low. Is he really going to say something? Maria smiled faintly. Oh, he's gonna say something, and they're going to remember it. But before the cameras rolled, the public would get their first glimpse of Abbot's composure. In Houston. That late afternoon Texas sun bore down hard, the kind of heat that made even a short walk from car to door feel longer. Outside the Texas Infrastructure and Public Works Summit, the crowd buzzed with anticipation. Not about Obama's remarks, but about seeing Governor Abbot in person. Local leaders, engineers, first responders, and students had been waiting for weeks to hear his keynote. Inside, the setup was simple. A podium, folding chairs for the panelists, a banner reading Built to Last, Texas for the Future. Abbott's name was in small print, exactly how he liked it. Backstage, a staffer gave him a nervous nod. Governor, welcome. He smiled, thanked her, sipped from a water bottle, and scanned the modest group moving in organized silence. Maria and Daniel stood off to the side, checking the time. They knew there were reporters in the room. Some couldn't resist asking about the day's tension. Daniel had already spotted Trina Salazar from the local affiliate, the same journalist who'd been told to press him if she had the chance. Abbot noticed too. Let me guess, he said quietly to Daniel. Half the folks here want to talk infrastructure. The other half want to watch me take a swing. Daniel smirked. Pretty much. Abbot didn't look nervous, but there was a purposeful precision in the way he straightened his cuffs and looked toward the podium. When the moderator introduced him, the crowd applauded. Warm, genuine, untouched by the day's political drama. He started with real stories. Road crews rebuilding after hurricanes. Fire departments in rural counties getting long overdue equipment, and why broadband in underserved communities was no longer a luxury. His tone was steady, focused. For 20 minutes, politics felt miles away. Then came the moment. The panel's moderator, a former public safety commissioner, thanked him and opened the floor for questions. Most were about policy, funding, and timelines. And then, Trina Salazar raised her hand. Governor Abbot, she said, voice level, earlier today, President Obama accused you of quietly obstructing federal efforts. Do you have a response? The room stilled, every camera lens tilted toward him. Abbot's smile was faint but firm. You know, he said slowly, I've spent the past decade working for the people of Texas, not plotting in some back room. My focus has been on keeping communities safe, projects moving, and freedoms protected. He paused, let the air settle. I get it, politics gets heated, but facts matter. And here's one. I was elected to serve Texans, not Washington talking points. It wasn't a direct strike, but it was clean, calm, and unmistakably clear. A murmur rippled across the room. The moderator moved on. Abbot didn't revisit the topic. Backstage, Daniel approached him. Smooth. Abbot replied, that wasn't the real answer. That's coming later. But it was enough to spark a ripple of knowing murmurs. Cameras clicked. The moderator moved on. Abbot didn't return to the subject. Backstage, Maria caught up with him. Smooth. Abbot just nodded. That wasn't the real answer. That's coming later. In the press area, Trina Salazar filed her story for the evening broadcast. She knew what the clip would show: a restrained, composed Abbot. But she could sense it. The real headline hadn't happened yet. It would come from whatever Abbot had planned next. As he left the convention center, walking past cheering county officials and posing with students, Abbot looked exactly how he wanted to be seen: calm, steady, above the fray. But Daniel, trailing just behind, knew what was coming. The TPN, Texas Public News crew, had already confirmed the interview slot. They were setting up in a quiet downtown Dallas studio just a few blocks from Abbott's hotel. This wouldn't be a polite rebuttal. This would be the moment the story turned. By the time Abbott's motorcade pulled into the station's small lot, the sun had dropped behind the skyline, washing the streets in streaks of orange and red. The building was modest, beige brick between a tax office and a bakery, but inside the atmosphere was sharp and focused. Cameron Wells, the interviewer, sat in the studio flipping through her handwritten notes. She greeted Abbott with a firm handshake, the kind that said, "This will be fair, but it won't be easy." "Cameron," Abbott said with a nod, "glad we could make this work." Maria and Daniel awaited just outside the doors, speaking in low voices. The final draft of Abbott's talking points sat in Daniel's hand, not that Abbott would need them. He preferred a natural cadence, folding facts into calm delivery. Inside, the production team adjusted lights and tested mics. Abbott sat down in the armchair they'd set for him, leaning back with one ankle crossed over his knee. Not arrogance, control. He knew in the age of viral clips, tone was as powerful as truth. Cameron settled into her seat opposite him. "We'll keep it straightforward," she said, "but I have to ask the question everyone's expecting." Abbott gave a single nod. "Fair enough." The red light on the camera blinked to life. Cameron opened with two standard questions about infrastructure plans and state budgeting. Viewers eased in, thinking it was just another policy sit-down. Then she shifted. "Governor, earlier today, President Obama made a very direct accusation. He said you've been working behind the scenes to undermine federal efforts. What's your response?" Abbott didn't blink. He let the question hang for just a moment, enough for every viewer to lean in, then answered, steady but unmistakably pointed. "Well, Cameron, I've spent my career focused on building things, not breaking them. I don't work in whispers. I don't send secret messages to agencies, and I don't run Texas from the shadows." He paused, then leaned in just slightly, his voice lowering a touch, just enough for intimacy. "This idea that I'm operating some hidden agenda, that's not a policy disagreement, that's fiction. And the problem with fiction in politics is, if you repeat it enough, people start thinking it's fact. And when leaders start chasing rumors instead of solving problems, bad decisions get made, not for them, but for the people they're supposed to serve." He let that land. Then, and let's be real clear about this, if a national leader is spending more time blaming governors than fixing what's in front of them, maybe the issue isn't the governors. In the control room, a young producer whispered, "That's the clip." Cameron gave it a moment, then asked, "So what would you say to President Obama if he were here in this room right now?" Abbott didn't hesitate. "I'd say this: focus on the work. Texas isn't your enemy. It's part of the country you swore to serve. You don't build unity by throwing blame. And leadership isn't about who talks louder. It's about who delivers." They moved on to state energy policy, education access, emergency response funding. But everyone in the room knew what would dominate the headlines the next morning. When the cameras cut off, Cameron smiled. That was precise. Abbott stood up, adjusted his jacket. That was intentional. Just outside, Daniel walked in. "They're already asking for the clip. Every network." Abbott nodded. "Good. Make sure the facts come with it." They exited into the warm Dallas night, the hum of equipment fading behind them. Inside one of the SUVs, Maria was already drafting a brief press release. Governor Abbott responds directly to today's accusations with a call for facts and focus. But by the time the interview aired, it wasn't just political circles paying attention. The reaction was already spreading to phones, bars, coffee shops, and living rooms across the country. At 8:00 p.m. Central, the TPN segment hit the air. It hadn't even gone national yet, and it was already trending on Twitter. A teaser clip, quietly leaked from the control room, had gone live an hour earlier. And the one line, "if a national leader is spending more time blaming governors," was already on fire. Less than an hour after the interview was filmed, the single line, "if a national leader is spending more time blaming governors than solving problems," was already making its way into living rooms from Sacramento to Boston. People weren't tuning in out of loyalty to a party. They just wanted to see how Abbott handled it. Cable news split-screened the moment instantly. On the left, Cameron Wells and Governor Abbott in that modest Dallas studio. On the right, the text of Obama's accusation from earlier that day. Cameron's opening questions in the segment built tension slowly. Small talk, policy, like the early stages of a chess match. Then came the pivot. She asked directly about Obama's remarks. The camera stayed tight on Abbott's face. His voice remained steady. No theatrics, just rhythm, logic, and tone. When he said, "That's fiction," and the problem with fiction in politics is people start mistaking it for fact. The control room back in Austin, where some of Abbott's team had gathered, quietly applauded. And when he followed it with the line about a leader blaming governors, Daniel's phone buzzed with the first wave of reactions. A text from Maria, "This is blowing up." Another from a reporter at TPN, "CNN is quoting it already, MSNBC too." Over on MSNBC, a panel was already dissecting it. One analyst said, "Abbott didn't defend himself. He reframed the attack. He made it look like Obama was the one out of position." Fox News tried a different angle, inviting commentators to argue that Abbott dodged the deeper questions. But even there, the clip ran again and again because it was impossible to ignore. In a bar in Fort Worth, a group of regulars who rarely agreed on anything were gathered around the screen. One man in a Houston Astros cap muttered, "He didn't yell, he didn't insult, he just made him look small." A woman next to him nodded, "That's the difference. Obama swung, Abbott shifted the whole ring." On social media, hashtags like Abbott Clapback and #leadership not blame started trending within minutes. Even users who didn't usually talk politics were sharing the clip, adding captions like, "Masterclass in keeping your cool under fire." This is how you diffuse chaos. Stay factual, stay focused. Meanwhile, inside Obama's communications war room, the mood was split. Some aides wanted to ignore it, insisting that engaging further would only stretch the cycle. Others argued he needed to respond again, maybe that very night. But Obama himself, scrolling his phone, had already seen the clip again and again. At 9:14 p.m. he tweeted, "Greg Abbott is lying. Everyone knows it. We'll bring the facts. Stay tuned." The post racked up thousands of likes within minutes, but it also guaranteed that Abbott's words would dominate headlines the next morning. Back in Dallas, Abbott's team sat in a quiet hotel conference room, watching the ripple effect in real time. Maria scrolled through homepage after homepage. "Every lead image is either the interview or a quote pull from that line," she said. Daniel looked up from his laptop. "We just flipped his fire into our platform." Abbott, arms folded, leaning back in his chair, said simply, "Now we let it breathe. No more from me tonight." They all knew him. Restraint was part of the strategy. Obama was at his most effective when he could bait his opponents into a back and forth. Abbott had just flipped that dynamic. A single clean reply, no extras, and now the public and the press could do the rest. From small towns to major cities, people were still watching the clip hours later. For some, it confirmed what they already believed about Abbott. Level-headed, no nonsense, focused on results. For others, it was their first glimpse of a tone they hadn't heard in a while. Leadership without spectacle. As the night wore on, it became clear. The impact wouldn't just come from political pundits. It would come from how everyday people carried that line into morning. By sunrise, the interview had become the lead story on every major morning show. On Good Morning America, they replayed Abbott's line about blaming governors 3 times in 5 minutes. The host chuckled at how sharp it was. Analysts nodded. In Washington, D.C., commuters on the metro watched it on their phones. Some even turned their screens slightly so nearby strangers could see. In coffee shops from Portland, Maine to Santa Fe, New Mexico, the clip played on loop. Subtitled, looped, shared. The words hit just as hard as the night before. The real turning point wasn't just how many times it was repeated, it was how it was interpreted. For months, Obama had been laying out the idea that Abbott, and governors like him, were undermining national unity. But Abbott's response cut through that narrative. He reframed it entirely, not as sabotage, but as federal overreach versus local leadership. In a Dallas high-rise, a marketing team started their Monday meeting. Before the first agenda item, someone pulled up the clip. "That's how you take a hit," a team lead said. "Don't flail, don't posture, just deliver the facts and walk away." Even conservative outlets that had downplayed the confrontation initially were forced to cover it because audiences demanded it. By mid-morning, several fact-checking organizations released reports. No evidence that Abbott had interfered in any federal agency. In some cases, the opposite. Coordination, not obstruction. Fact-checkers didn't take long. By midday, multiple outlets had published breakdowns showing no evidence that Governor Abbott had interfered in federal policy, and in some instances, proving the opposite. On CNN, a reporter read excerpts from internal memos showing how routine Abbott's cooperation with federal agencies had been. On TPN, host Cameron Wells returned for a follow-up segment, remarking that Abbott had been completely composed before and after the interview, as if he knew exactly how far his words would carry. Meanwhile, in Washington, the White House was tense. An aide dropped a stack of headlines onto Obama's desk. Abbott's measured response lands heavy blow. Fact checks favor Abbott after Obama attack. When calm beats chaos. Obama paced his office, checking his phone every few minutes. Some advisors urged him to pivot, focus on economic wins or foreign policy. But he kept circling back. "We're not letting him get away with it," he said flatly. That same morning in a Phoenix newsroom, Trina Salazar prepped for her evening segment. She'd been in the audience during Abbott's infrastructure summit, asking the question that kicked off his measured reply. Now her footage, combined with the interview clip, was in high demand. "Every network wants the local angle," her producer told her. "You're going to be everywhere by noon." Public reaction had already moved beyond politics. On Instagram, athletes, musicians, and actors reposted the clip. A well-known NBA player captioned it, "Leaders lead, that's how you do it." What made it different wasn't just that Abbott defended himself, it was how he shifted the frame entirely. Instead of wrangling with the accusation, he questioned the quality of the accusation itself. And because his tone was so calm, the spotlight stayed on the substance, not the performance. Back in Austin, Daniel Reyes sat in his apartment, the TV on mute, watching channel after channel run side-by-side comparisons. Obama's accusation. Abbott's response? His phone rang. Maria. "We've got something here," she said. "The more they replay it, the weaker his claim looks. By tomorrow, it'll be common knowledge that this one backfired." Daniel grinned. "Then let's make sure tomorrow isn't the end of it." That afternoon, the Democratic National Committee attempted a counterpunch, issuing a statement insisting that there were still serious concerns about Abbott's conduct. But the press treated it like aftershock, not a fresh tremor. The main story was still Abbott's line. Back at the governor's office, Maria read through a growing stack of media requests. "Morning shows, podcasts, late night, everyone wants him," she told the team. Abbott reviewed the list, shook his head. "We're not going on a tour. One message, one delivery. That's it." "Why stop now?" Daniel asked. Abbott's response was immediate. "Because when you've said the truth clearly, you don't need to repeat it. The people who needed to hear it, heard it. Now we let them talk." The media, however, wasn't done. By Tuesday morning, it had evolved past a political story. It was now a cultural moment. Every major outlet, TV, print, radio, had their own take on Abbott's response. The clip had been watched millions of times across every platform. The line had become a soundbite in its purest form. Short, memorable, impossible to misinterpret. On the Today Show, hosts replayed the segment before a panel titled, "The Art of the Political Clapback." One commentator noted, "The restraint is what's remarkable. He didn't take the bait. He made it a leadership moment, not a political one." Late-night shows jumped on it. On The Late Show, the monologue opened with Abbott's calm response. The host held up a notebook and pretended to take notes. "Step 1, stay calm. Step 2, know your facts. Step 3, make the other guy wish he'd stayed quiet." The crowd roared. It wasn't just comedy. In Los Angeles, a drive-time radio host played the clip between pop songs, telling listeners, "If you haven't seen it yet, trust me. By the end of the day, you'll be quoting it." On TikTok, users remixed the audio into skits, parody videos, even dance trends. The line, "The job of a leader is to solve problems, not point fingers," set to a beat, became unexpectedly viral. But the most telling sign of the frenzy? Apolitical voices were joining in. A celebrity chef reposted the clip with the caption, "Replace governor with head chef and it still works." A high school principal in Kansas tweeted, "I'm showing this to my student council. This is how leaders respond." In newsrooms, editors watched the engagement numbers surge. Stories that had been planned days earlier were bumped down to make room for more Abbott coverage. Even the usually reserved Wall Street Journal ran the headline, "Abbott's response reverberates beyond politics." Meanwhile, just down the block from the TPN studio in Dallas, Cameron Wells sipped coffee in a quiet cafe, scrolling through emails with her producer. "I've done hundreds of interviews," she said. She said, "But this one, it's different. People aren't just talking about the politics, they're talking about the message." Her producer nodded. "And they're talking about you too. Your name's everywhere." In D.C., the story had taken on a life of its own. Reporters ambushed senators in Capitol hallways. One Democrat called Abbott's reply a masterclass in discipline. A Republican senator, when asked for comment, muttered, "I didn't see it," then walked away. Those staffers later admitted they'd all watched it twice. One Democrat called Abbott's remarks a masterclass in restraint. A Republican, when pressed in a hallway, muttered, "I didn't see it," before quickly walking away. Those staffers later admitted they'd all watched it more than once. For Obama's team, the real problem wasn't just that Abbott's response had landed, it was that it had become a cultural reference point. Every repetition made it harder to counter without sounding petty or reactive. Inside the White House, aides debated whether to pivot to new topics, economic wins, climate policy, or keep trying to discredit Abbott. But the president himself was locked in, scrolling through repost after repost of that PBS clip. His frustration grew with each view. Back at the Texas governor's office, the atmosphere was focused but calm. Daniel Reyes kept a running list of headlines that favored their framing. Maria fielded press calls from the BBC, France 24, even a morning show in Sydney. When one aide suggested Abbott release a follow-up video to keep the fire going, he shut it down immediately. "No," he said, "that's not how you win this. You win by not overplaying your hand." In a downtown LA newsroom, Trina Salazar was patched into a national segment. She described the moment Abbott first answered her question at the Dallas summit. "He could have gone hard right there," she told the anchor. "But he didn't. He stayed calm. I could see it in his eyes. He was saving something." And then that interview dropped. Well, you've seen what happened. By midweek, even sports talk shows were chiming in. A basketball analyst joked, "That's like sinking a three, turning around before it lands, and walking off the court." The frenzy had transformed Abbott's reply from a rebuttal into a cultural shorthand, a symbol of staying cool, flipping a narrative, and never breaking a sweat. But the ripple effect in Washington was just beginning. Behind closed doors, political power brokers were reassessing the week's events. By Thursday, the tone across the Capitol had shifted. Yes, the bickering over appropriations continued. Yes, committees still held hearings. But everywhere, from lunch meetings to late-night text threads, the conversation kept circling back to Abbott's response. In a quiet Senate conference room, a team of Democratic strategists pored over fresh polling data. One slide stopped them cold. Abbott's favorability had ticked up 3 points nationally in just 48 hours. Among independents, the bump was even bigger. They didn't just like what he said, noted senior strategist Carol Mendoza. They liked how he said it. Calm, direct, not defensive. That's what voters miss in politics. Across town in a Republican strategy session, the mood was more conflicted. Some wanted to double down on attacking Abbott. Others warned that every mention of his name only reignited the clip, and the clip wasn't doing them any favors. One seasoned GOP consultant leaned back and said, "The issue is, it didn't feel like an attack. It felt like leadership. And that's a lot harder to counter than some partisan jab." At a quiet bistro in Georgetown, a group of Democratic donors sipped espresso and picked at pastries. "He reminded people why they trust him," one donor said, tapping the table. "If we channel that energy into key down ballot races, that's a gift." Back at the White House, aides debated whether Trump should bring it up in his next rally speech. One comm staffer warned that ignoring it looked like he'd been rattled. Another argued that mentioning Abbott again would only prolong the cycle. In the end, Trump split the difference. At a rally in Tampa, he said, "We've got people out there trying to take credit for our work, trying to slow us down. We know who they are." He didn't name Abbott, but the punch lacked energy, more like an echo of Monday's fire. In the media, however, the story wasn't done. Politico ran a piece titled "Anatomy of a Clapback," breaking down Abbott's timing, tone, and impact. The Washington Post editorial board praised his discipline. Even the New Yorker ran a cartoon, a calm Abbott sipping coffee while a red-faced caricature of Obama shouted in the background. Abbott's team stayed disciplined. Maria fielded dozens of appearance requests, late-night shows, long-form podcasts, Sunday talk shows. He turned them all down. "We said what needed to be said," he told the team during a morning briefing. "If we milk it, it loses its weight." That restraint only amplified public respect. By Friday, think pieces rolled in. Why silence is Abbott's strongest weapon? The art of knowing when to stop talking. In a Senate office, a young staffer showed her boss a Twitter thread. Military veterans were sharing leadership stories using the hashtag office standard. "This is beyond politics now," she said. "It's becoming a principle." Even some of Obama's own allies started to acknowledge the damage, if only off the record. One senior Democratic senator admitted quietly to a reporter, "Look, I don't agree with Abbott on much, but the man knows how to land a hit." It wasn't just about one political clash anymore. The real shift came from how Abbott handled it, not with fire, but with focus, not as a counterpunch, but as a reminder of how leadership could look when done differently. For some, it sparked nostalgia. For others, it was a revelation. But the person least interested in basking in the moment? Greg Abbott himself. And in his next speech, he made sure the takeaway was bigger than politics. The auditorium in Cleveland, Ohio was packed. Educators, youth mentors, and students from all across the Midwest filled the room. It was the last stop on a schedule Abbott had committed to months earlier, part of a youth leadership initiative he'd helped launch with bipartisan support. Officially, the crowd wasn't there to talk politics, but everyone knew something might get said. You could feel it in the air. When Abbott walked on stage, the applause was steady and respectful. He waved, shook hands in the front row, and stepped to the podium with the relaxed posture people had seen on screens all week. "I know it's been a busy week in the news," he began with a slight smile. That got a ripple of laughter. "And I've heard some of you think I might have something to say about it." He paused, then added, "But I want to make sure we keep the focus right where it belongs, on the work that actually changes lives, on the kids in our classrooms, on the families trying to build something better for the next generation." For the next 10 minutes, Abbott talked about mentorship. He told the story of a young girl he met in El Paso, once considered too difficult for school support programs, now running STEM workshops for younger students. The crowd was locked in. Then, without changing tone, he wove in the week's deeper message. Leadership isn't about finding someone to blame when things get hard. It's about taking responsibility, especially when the problems are bigger than you. He rested his hands on the podium. If you hold any kind of authority, whether you're running a classroom, a company, or a country, people are counting on you to face forward, not keep looking over your shoulder for someone to blame. The applause started slow, then picked up. "Here's the truth," he continued. "You can't control everything that happens to you, but you can control how you respond. You can decide whether to spend your energy throwing punches at the past or building something better for the future." It wasn't a direct mention of Obama, but everyone caught the reference. Teachers in the audience exchanged knowing looks. Students pulled out their phones. They knew this line was going places. Abbott wrapped up with a message aimed squarely at the crowd. You don't need a title to lead. You don't need a corner office or a fancy desk to take responsibility. Every single one of you has a sphere of influence, and the way you use it, that matters. Silence. Then an applause that swelled, louder, longer. Backstage, Daniel handed Abbott a bottle of water. "That's the quote," he said. "Face forward, not over your shoulder." Abbott gave a tired smile. "Good. Just make sure the takeaway's about them." The next morning, the press followed suit. Coverage of the Indianapolis event didn't just revisit the earlier drama. It tied the entire arc into a leadership lesson, framing Abbott's approach as a shift in political tone. On social media, educators and mentors started using the phrase #FaceForward to highlight their own stories. From classroom moments to community organizing, the message was cutting through the political noise and resonating where it mattered, in everyday life. For viewers at home, it wasn't just a win in a news cycle. It was a reminder of how to carry yourself when the heat's on, not just in politics, but in anything. Abbott had taken an accusation and turned it into a teaching moment, not just for his base, but for anyone willing to listen.